Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. I am your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I'm a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the Star Christ Production Network at sqpn.com. So today on day 10, we're covering Sacrosanctum Concilium 14 through 16 on active participation in the liturgy, right? So that's where we are here. If you want to follow along, you have a reading plan and details at sqpn.com/Vatican. Where are we in the document? Let's just put ourselves in place first. We're in chapter 1 of Sacrosanctum Concilium, General Principles for the Restoration and Promotion of the Sacred Liturgy. And we're in the starting part 2 of that chapter, which is the promotion of liturgical instruction and active participation, right? So that's really going to be the focus of today and tomorrow. Is really going to be the active participation and then talking about formation or instruction on the liturgy, because it isn't just something that, we just automatically get. There is aspects we automatically get because it is really based on, Jesus made the liturgy so that we as human beings are made for it, right? But it's still important to understand the aspects around it better so we can better participate, right? So yesterday we talked about the liturgy's connection to wider aspects. Today is going to be active participation. This is often misunderstood. Active participation, we understand it in the sense of the church, the sense of Vatican II and further church document. It's not just, we're doing more reading, we're doing more carrying up the gifts, we're doing more altar service. No, it's not about that so much. It's first of all about an attitude, about a mentality, about our hearts being actively going through the Mass, not just, saying something on the side, right? Like if you talk to people, your parents or grandparents, for most of us here, people were around before the council. It was very common. You would pray your rosary during Mass, or you would pray from a prayer book during Mass, and the priest would be doing this, and you really wouldn't pay attention except for maybe the elevation. You hear the bells, you look up to the elevation, but then you go back to praying. You're not participating. You're not actively involved in the Mass. Now, there was a movement, as we talked about in the introduction here for Sacrosanctum Concilium, in the liturgical movement to really get people involved more like that. And that was part of how the liturgical movement came into Vatican II. But it's important to understand this active participation is that we are heart and soul and mind, not necessarily how physically where we are in the church. So paragraph 14, which is the most important of the 3 paragraphs today, it's going to have 3 parts, which are 3 paragraphs in the text, like in the sense of like there's space, but there's not new numbers. So I'm going to read each of those and then comment on each, right? So our first paragraph, 14-1, Mother Church earnestly desires that all the faithful should be led to that fully conscious and active participation in liturgical celebration, which is demanded by the very nature of the liturgy, right? So the liturgy itself demands this. Continuing, such participation by the Christian people as a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a redeemed people, is their right and duty by reason of their baptism. So in that second sentence, it's quoting 1 Peter chapter 2. They are that chosen race, royal priesthood, etc. And right, so this is what I was talking about when I did that introduction here, right? It's that attitude that's mentioned first. Active participation about being fully conscious to what is happening during the liturgy, to putting our mind and heart and soul into the liturgy. We need to be attentive to the sacrifice happening. And in the Mass, the Eucharist, the sacrifice in Calvary is represented on the altar in an unbloodied manner, right? So it's different for me as a priest. If I am a little bit distracted, everyone notices. I can notice more the difficulty and more the how you, as someone in the pew, you don't notice a little bit. Sometimes I've gone to go to confession at a parish where they hear confession during Mass. There's several priests there, and they often hear confession during Mass, and they're pretty good at hearing confessions. And so I'll go there, and I won't dress as a priest. I'll just dress in, polo shirt or something like that. And I'll be there in line at the back for a confession, but I'm also there during the Mass. So you're supposed to be participating in the Mass. And I can see how, as a lay person, you can easily get, as a person in the pews, not necessarily a lay person, religious too, you can easily get more distracted in that sense, because at certain points in the liturgy, I'm more thinking about, okay, what sins am I going to confess this time and things like that, right? And I recognize that, for that, right? And so I'm not necessarily as focused on the liturgy. I say all the words, the responses, but I'm not really the super focused. But that's important to note. This active aspect of the liturgy is about our mind, our heart, our soul, not necessarily, I'm up there at the front doing this or that in the liturgy. No, my mind and heart and soul there, right? And this is even true, even if physically we're not fully there. I'm sure you've seen it where the mom has to run after the toddler who decides to run out into the entranceway to the church, something like that, or the toddler's just being so disruptive that mom moves out to the entranceway with the toddler so the toddler doesn't cause an issue. And mom could think, oh, I didn't really get to participate in Mass. But no, if your mind is actively going into that sacrifice, even your body for reasons of being a mother, being a father, whatever, it can't be there. Your heart is there. You are actively participating. You're doing much better than the person who's just kind of sitting there, looks like Mass, and just kind of letting their mind wander, not thinking about Jesus, not thinking about the Eucharist. And also this paragraph talks about the royal priesthood, right? They're all that chosen race, that royal priesthood, right? And that's important that all of us can offer our sacrifices. That's part of the things that when you have the offertory, bring forward the gifts. And there's a lot of times you bring forward the donations that people give at Mass at the same time. Why? Because this is the little sacrifices they made for Jesus, right? You're offering your $20 bail or whatever for Jesus. That's your sacrifice. And this comes from baptism. This is based in baptism, not based in ordination. Obviously, me as an ordained priest, I have a second priesthood, ordained priesthood of the sacrament of orders. But all of us as Christians have this royal priesthood. And we participate offering ourselves with Jesus. We participate in the Eucharist, participate in the liturgy that way. So going on to 14-2. In the restoration and promotion of the sacred liturgy, this full and active participation by all people is the aim to be considered before all else. For it is the primary and indispensable source from which the faithful derive true Christian spirit, and therefore pastoral souls must zealously strive to achieve it by means of necessary instruction in all their pastoral work, right? So that is a key goal of the liturgical change of Vatican II, is that active participation. And, there are changes in the liturgy that are meant to bring that about, right? So, for example, when my dad was a little kid and he was serving, it was generally just the server who would respond, right? And even the fact that the priest is saying it out loud in the vernacular so everyone can understand is a way that can help people have that active participation, because you hear it and you understand it. I understand Latin well enough. I can understand the Latin part, but the vernacular helps the people who are not, as nerdy and as academic as me to understand everything so they can more easily put their mind, their heart, their soul into the liturgy. And there's many more responses by the congregation than there was before, especially considering a lot of times those are only done by the server. Even the fact that now most of the prayers of the priest are out loud, whereas before a lot of them were whispered. Now, part of that is that we now have modern sound systems. Now, you don't need 20 super modern sound systems, but even the kind of microphone systems you'd have in the 60s and the 50s would really transform, because part of the challenge would be if you're in a big, huge church, and you're just using your voice to project it, you don't have any kind of electronic system, it would be tough to say the whole Mass. Your voice would be hoarse by the end of it. But with the modern electronic sound system, that's much easier. And so that's part of the kind of thing, I think, part of why that happened. But I also think that this idea of most of it being out loud helps people understand, okay, I'm thinking of this, and helps our mind stop. When our mind wanders, we hear the priest say it and it brings us back. And they also needed instruction about the liturgy, how often to explain the parts of the liturgy. I think, honestly, a lot of parishes could do well with a few homilies a year, kind of pointing out, okay, this part of the Mass, this is what we're doing. This is why we say this prayer. This is where this prayer comes from. Here's the Bible verses that we're, quoting or whatever, things like that. And so moving on to 14-3, yet it'd be futile to entertain any hopes of realizing this unless past themselves in the first place become thoroughly imbued with the spirit and the power of the liturgy and undertake to give instruction about it. A prime need, therefore, is the attention to its direction, first of all, the liturgical instruction of the clergy, wherefore the Sacred Council has decided to enact as follows. So sorry there. I hope my voice cracked a little bit. I got to take a drink of water. But anyways, so the pastors are key for bringing about this active participation. We need to have it celebrate so the congregation gets in. How do I celebrate the Mass, a priest? Do I do that, right? And This includes instructing the clergy. Now, next few numbers, which we're going to cover the rest of today and tomorrow, go into this in detail about all the things about instructing the clergy and then instructing the congregation so that we can achieve this active participation. Paragraph 15 is one of the briefest paragraphs. I'll read it, then give like 2 lines, and we'll move on to 16. So paragraph 15. Professors who are appointed to teach liturgy in seminaries, religious houses of study, and theological faculties must be properly trained in their work in institutes which specialize in the subject, right? Need to train seminary professors specifically in the liturgy. And there has been a growth of liturgical theology since then. So it's not just how do we celebrate Mass, the kind of practical aspect, but it is, or what we might call the rubrics, right? The kind of exact prayers. But it is, what does it mean? What's the history? Where does it come about? And things like that. That is not my training. My doctoral degree is moral theology, not liturgical theology. But I have this idea, right? So now I move on to paragraph 16, which is not too long. And we're going to do it briefly. So let's read the text. The study of sacred liturgy is to rely on the compulsory major course in seminaries and religious houses of studies, and theological faculties is to rank among the principal courses. It is taught under its theological, historical, spiritual, pastoral, and juridical aspects. We'll go into all those aspects when we get to the commentary. Moreover, other professors will strive to expound the mystery of Christ and the history of salvation from the angle proper to each in their own subjects, must nevertheless do so in a way which will clearly bring out the connection between their subjects and the liturgy, as also the unity which underlies all the priestly training, right? So this is really, really important in this aspect, right? Oh, one more line in the paragraph. The consideration is especially important for professors of dogmatic, spiritual, and pastoral theology, and for those of Holy Scripture, right? So I primarily teach moral theology. It's one of the few ones that's not mentioned here, but that is very important to kind of connect the liturgy with the other aspects of theology. At the beginning, I talked about seminaries and religious houses of studies. Technically, I was never in the seminary. I was in a religious house of studies. But because I'm a religious priest and I started right from the beginning as a religious, but it's commonly referred to as a seminary, even if those kind of terms aren't precise there. But that is, that's that. But also, like, you have sisters who are religious house of studies, and they often take at least somewhat of theology. They might not take the full degree of priesthood, but they do take a bit usually. And so things like that. And there's 5 aspects, right? So you're not just teaching Mass, you're not just saying Mass, hearing confessions, knowing the exact roots, but you're actually going deep, you're understanding what's behind it. So what are the 5 aspects? The theological, historical, spiritual, pastoral, and juridical. Let's have a sentence on each of those, right? The theological, there's a theology behind each word, and actually, where does it come from in Scripture? What's the meaning? Why? How does this represent sacrifice in the Old Testament or sacrifice in the time of Jesus, or things like that, right? So those kind of things. Historical, how it developed. There is a history of the text of the liturgy. The text of the liturgy don't just like come down from heaven in a particular time, right? We have for about 150, say Justin Martyr, he kind of indicates that at that time, each priest would have their own kind of Eucharistic prayer they would do. But then those got codified a little longer later on and things like that. And that's the whole history. The spiritual, how it feeds our spiritual life, right? What we talked about yesterday. The pastoral, the context of the liturgy, how the liturgy helps feed the people, how the liturgy helps in pastoral ministry, how the pastoral ministry leads to the liturgy, and the liturgy leads to pastoral ministry. Juridical, what's the kind of canonical, juridical aspects, right? So those are the 5 aspects. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with the next paragraphs of Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is paragraph 17 to 20 on promotion and study of the liturgy. There is a little typo in the reading plan. I'll probably try and fix it before this is up, but if you got a plan earlier, accidentally I listed paragraph 16 on both days. Just read it one of the days. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook or X for more information on the podcast, like playlists for individual documents or a reading plan.